So today I wanted to consider one of life's biggest questions. How did we get here? As a starting point, I want to read Genesis chapter 1. But before I do that, let me make a couple of quick observations. Number one, Genesis is scripture. It is not a science textbook, and we need to make allowances for the differences between the two. Number two, Genesis starts at the beginning from our perspective, but God existed before all of creation, and we get a small glimpse of that in the Gospel of John, in John chapter 1, verses 1 to 3. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. So this describes the beginning, what we're about to read, from our vantage point here. It doesn't talk about God's beginning. It talks about our beginning, creation's beginning. Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 to 31. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate day from night. And let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. And God blessed them and said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath, the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Now, generally speaking, we're presented with two completely opposite opinions on how life came to be. There is, if you will, atheistic evolution on the one side and creationism on the other. So while I want to unpack some of the details in this chapter over the next few weeks, today I just want to focus on those opening 5 words. In the beginning, God created. That is the primary issue at stake. The details are far less important. So let's focus on just one point. What is the source of life? There are 2 main hypotheses. Pastor Randy Alcorn summarizes them this way. In the secular account, you are the descendant of a tiny cell of primordial protoplasm washed up on an empty beach 3.5 billion years ago. You are the blind and arbitrary product of time, chance, and natural forces. You are a mere grab bag of atomic particles, a conglomeration of genetic substance. You exist on a tiny planet in a minute solar system in an empty corner of a meaningless universe. You are a purely biological entity, different only in degree but not in kind from a microbe, a virus, or an amoeba. You have no essence beyond your body, and at death you will cease to exist entirely. In short, you came from nothing and are going nowhere. In the Christian view, by contrast, you are the special creation of a good and all-powerful God. You are created in his image with capacities to think, feel, and worship that set you above all other life forms. You differ from the animals not simply in degree, but in kind. Not only is your kind unique, but you are unique among your kind. Your Creator loves you so much and so intensely desires your companionship and affection that he has a perfect plan for your life. In addition, God gave the life of his only Son that you might spend eternity with him. If you're willing to accept the gift of salvation, you can become a child of God. So either creation in general and life in particular are the result of an intentional act by a living being with sufficient power, intelligence, and creativity to explain all that exists, or creation and life are the result of a fluke, a freak accident. Put starkly, either God created everything or an accident created everything. And obviously, which one we believe has massive implications for all of our life, including our values, our purpose, and our morality. If life is a mere fluke, then your life and my life are utterly meaningless. If life is an accident, then morality is an illusion. If life came about by chance, then someone's value will almost always be measured in a utilitarian way. What is someone able to do or produce? Ultimately, how useful are they to me? But if God created life, then your life and mine have purpose, and we should attempt to find it. If God created life, then he would have the right to create laws and standards and hold us accountable to those. If God created life, then life itself has been deemed valuable by him and not just based on a person's usefulness. So with the bases fully loaded, let's explore a little bit more. Can inanimate matter be the explanation for life and everything that exists? Or is God a more reasonable explanation? Put it another way, were we created by a who or by a what? Let's consider the what side of the equation first. Perhaps the best known version of that currently would be the Big Bang Theory. Non-living matter interacting with more non-living matter in such a way that something somehow caused life to come into existence. So I wanted to explore that idea a bit more. So I decided I would talk to a couple of SMEs, a couple of subject matter experts. And so I want to show you a quick video from a couple of subject matter experts that we filmed this week.
I'm Rob, Major Splody. Did 20 years in the Marines, so fairly knowledgeable in all things violence, kinetic, and making things go boom or pop.
I'm Jerry Pelletier, and I majored in physics and double major in physics and chemistry and minor in mathematics. And I taught for 44 years in high school, math and science. Well, life is anything that can can reproduce and has metabolism, that is able to consume food or something and produce something else. It's got to have a metabolism. There's an exchange. Like for us, we metabolize by eating food and by breathing oxygen, and plants produce food and produce oxygen and take in carbon dioxide. So it's, as long as you metabolize your life. Well, we tried, but it always ended up just, we can reorganize the matter, and sometimes it kind of looks living, like when we made the like silly putty kind of stuff, and you make it and then it bounces around, but it doesn't. We'd never succeeded in any of that, even though sometimes you can kind of make it look like it's living, but it's not really. Well, I know it's been tried, and theoretically they say it's possible, but they've never really succeeded in doing it. And even with really artificial environments, they have not really been able to succeed in doing it. But they're still trying. Who knows? They might succeed, This is the 1,000 monkey thing.
Well, okay, military-wise, using an explosive is usually to take something and usually something functional and then render it into something that's very much not functional. Well, the more explosives you use, the bigger the mess you're going to make usually. If you use a small amount, yes, you can knock down a tree, or a little bit more, you can knock down a building. Use a whole bunch and you'll flatten a city. Beauty is subjective, so I'm not going to go there, but I will say that with all the time and study that I've done of the military and use of explosives and application, it's never created life. If you take a couple examples, some of the battles in World War I, where they would launch millions of shells at each other in the first hour of a fight. You're talking, tons and thousands of, tens of thousands of tons of explosives in a very small area. And all it is it's a barren wasteland when they're done. If you look at some other examples of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, yeah, lots of explosives, just different way of producing the explosive, not life, but the opposite, long-term detrimental to life existing there. Well, I liken that to putting out a pile of explosives in a field, putting a whole bunch of construction materials on top of it, blowing it up, and expecting there to be a house when you're done. I don't see it happening.
And the laws of thermodynamics basically say that even if left alone, things would deteriorate. You have to keep applying energy of some sort in order for some structure to stay there, or else by itself it will eventually fall apart.
Well, just going back to an earlier question, have I ever heard of life being created from an explosive? And I can say there's been one instance when I've heard of it happening. And you've probably seen it too. It's an old Star Trek movie called The Wrath of Khan, where at the end they blow up a bomb that creates life on a planet, and that's what it's designed to do. But outside of science fiction, no, I haven't heard of it or seen it happen.
However, some people still cling on, Star Trek joke intended, to the notion that life came about by accident and hope that one day science will be able to prove it. All I can say is good luck with that. But what if it didn't? What if it didn't? What if life was intentionally created? What if the answer to how did life begin is a who rather than a what? A living being rather than an accident? Think about it. It's interesting, isn't it, that children routinely ask the question, who made the world? Rather than what made the world? It seems that children intuitively recognize that it would take a who, a personal cause, to make something as complex as the world, and not just a what, an impersonal cause. I love something I read a few years ago by a guy called Jay Bujashevsky, and he explains this in his book called Ask Me Anything, during a conversation he has with a student, coincidentally called Peter. Anything that doesn't have to be requires a cause sufficient to account for the effect. Remember the puddle and the picture. Sure, the rain could have made the puddle and the artist could have made the picture, but the rain couldn't have made the picture. That cause wouldn't have been sufficient to account for the effect. All right, I can see that the rain couldn't cause the picture, but without knowing all the different kinds of what there are, how do I know that there isn't a single what that would have been sufficient to cause the world? Think of it this way. Would you agree that the world has both who's and what's in it? That's pretty obvious. And would you also agree that a who is greater than a what? What do you mean? Well, for one thing, a what can make a what, and a who can make a what, but only a who can make a who.
That sounds like Dr. Seuss.
That seems true. Now put those 2 points together. If only a who can make a who and the world includes who's, then only a who can make the world. You see, friends, the issue is not about process. It's not about the process by which life came about. It's not about the length of time it took for life to develop to what you and I currently experience. The issue, the key issue, the only real issue is source. Who or what or how did this happen? Everything else is a detail. And personally, I couldn't care less whether evolution was some part of that process or not. It doesn't matter to me one bit whether it took 6 days or 6 billion years. Those are details. I mean, I believe the time frame is much closer to 6 days than 6 billion years. But if it turned out that Genesis chapter 1 was using the word day figuratively, or that the day then was not the same length as the day now, would that matter to me at all? I don't think so. I mean, how do you even measure a day when God doesn't create the sun until day 4? Asking for a friend. And of course, we know it says in 2 Peter 3 verse 8, but do not overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years and 1,000 years as 1 day. Let's just be honest for a moment. If you were given the job of explaining creation to a group of people with no modern scientific knowledge, how would you go about it? They don't know the earth is round. They don't know the earth orbits the sun. They don't know about cells, let alone about DNA. Would you use a whole bunch of incomprehensible scientific language, or would you say it simply in a way that was good enough?
Mm-hmm.
If your child or grandchild asked this question when they were little, how would you go about explaining it? And if the 6 days are a literal 6 days and Adam and Eve were created about 6,000 years ago, how do we see light from planets that appear to be more than 6,000 light years away? Where did Cain's wife come from? And how do you fit somewhere in the region of 50,000 different birds, reptiles, and mammals onto the ark? And why is it that the earth is initially classified as formless and void? See, when those two Hebrew words that are translated as formless and void or without form and void are used elsewhere, they always refer to the judgment of God. So as one commentator, Alan P. Ross, points out, waste and void cannot describe an intermediate stage in God's work of creation. Now, I'm not trying to prove a point with that. I'm just trying to say all of those things give me a little bit of pause. They make me go, I have a view, but there's a little elasticity in that view because I can see how you can do the math differently from how I do the math. And so I want to allow some maneuvering room in there when we start talking about how we interpret Scripture versus what Scripture actually says, right? Because there's a gap between those 2 points quite often. Because in many of these places, we're having to build from a certain amount of knowledge, and then there's this other bunch of questions that we have that just don't get answered. God apparently didn't think we needed to know. So he didn't say certain things. Of course, I believe God could create all that exists in 6 days. I believe God could create all that exists in 6 seconds. He could do it any way he wanted, and that's the point. He can do it any way he wants. Now, perhaps he supernaturally made all kinds of things to work in ways they normally wouldn't. And he sped up time, he sped up development, he slowed down time, he miniaturized all the animals so they would fit on the ark. I don't know. We believe in a God who can raise the dead. We believe in a God who can walk through walls. We believe in a God who can heal the sick. We believe in a God who can do all kinds of stuff. So, there's not much that's off the table. But at the same time, where it doesn't specify, I need to allow a little bit of room, don't I? And perhaps our finite brains aren't capable of understanding the way he did do it. So he just gave us a simple enough answer that was good enough. That was all we actually needed to know in order to be able to live the way we're supposed to live. Again, keep in mind, the overarching purpose of the book of Genesis, one of them would be to prepare us for the 10 Commandments and the laws that are coming. We're here receiving part of the rationale. God made you, that's why you should obey him. Now, don't get me wrong, there are all kinds of issues with various answers proposed by atheist scientists as well. I'm not arguing for those, especially not wholesale. I'm simply suggesting that it's more than okay for us to say about parts of this, I'm not sure. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say. Many of the issues with the atheist views come down to timings and sequence of events. The parts they've struggled to put together are where there would be things that would need to both come about sequentially, one after another, and at the same time exist at the same time so they would function. There are huge gaps, for example, in the fossil record, which argue strongly against evolution from one species to another, as opposed to within a species. And there are changes that would need to happen in moments, not in millennia, right? A fish can't just crawl out of the water and then walk on land and breathe if it takes 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years to develop lungs. It has to be able to do that right off the bat. It's not going to work. that creature is going to die when it tries to move out from water to land in the absence of already having the structure to be able to function in a different environment. But again, I wouldn't use that as a proof of creation. I mean, honestly, if someone found fossil records tomorrow that solved gaps, would it make me think, oh, I'm wrong, I give up on my belief in God? It wouldn't for a moment. Now, there's some benefit to believers making counter-arguments to scientific theories, but at least some of it, I believe, is wrongly motivated. And I'll explain why. You see, you can see that by the way some believers treat other believers if they don't agree on every last little detail. Again, we talked about this a little last time. There's sometimes this thing where people take the moral high ground where they take every little thing throughout all the Bible entirely literally every time, which clearly is an error. You see that in the Gospel of John over and over and over again. Religious people take Jesus literally when he's not being literal. Now, I'm not saying Genesis isn't literal. I'm just saying we need to be a little bit careful about how we do the math there and how strong we are and the way we relate to other people if they look at it a little bit different from us. I mean, that's one of the main ways religion operates, is it becomes very harsh and very dogmatic. That's one of the differences between religion and faith. Faith has a fairly good-sized mystery category, I would argue. I think at any point in time in my life, I've had a fair number of things that are shoved into the I don't know yet drawer, or I don't understand that, or I'm waiting for that to make sense to me, or this thing that happened in my life, why was that allowed? I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that's in that mystery box. And religion really doesn't like that. It likes to answer things definitively every time. It really dislikes grey. But you see, I believe part of what has happened is since the advent of the theory of evolution, an anti-biblical scientific view, there has been a reaction among many believers to adopt an anti-scientific biblical view. That's caused people in general to perceive that they must choose between science and the Bible. But is that choice actually necessary? I mean, did not God himself create the laws of physics, for example? I don't believe, as a believer, I have anything to fear from science whatsoever. Now, for sure, some people will attempt to leverage science in a way to further their worldview. I mean, come on, we live in a day where you're going to read a scientific study about the benefits of drinking coffee that was sponsored by Starbucks. Why should we expect the big picture stuff not to also carry convenient bias when somebody wants it to? That's not disputing the science. That's just saying, yes, but you forgot all those negative things that coffee does. You conveniently ignored all that information because this part suited your argument. I would suggest there's a lot of that goes on right now in the scientific world.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think as believers we have anything to fear from science. I mean, if you looked at the history, the who's who of science over the last 3-4 centuries, almost everyone's a believer. Almost everyone is coming from a biblical worldview and saying, the reason I'm fascinated by science is because it points to my Creator. So that's why I want to go and look and see and explore and do all of this. And surely the fact that we now have this vastly expanded understanding of the scope of creation and how far the universe stretches, and there's another and another and another, and how complex the human body is, and the DNA strands and all those things. I mean, that fills me with more awe and wonder, not less. That surely requires a bigger exclamation, not a smaller one. I mean, I laughed about that with something I was reading about the multiverse. If one universe demands an explanation, then multi-universes surely demands even more explanation, not less. It doesn't get you off the hook. But the reality is that science and faith mostly operate in entirely different spheres. Science may provide some insights into how the world came into being, but it must remain silent about why. To ponder why life exists, or more personally, why do I exist, is to engage in philosophy or in theology, not science. And I want to say something very clearly. No amount of human reasoning, whether it is biblically informed human reasoning or scientifically informed human reasoning, will get you to the right answer. It's not how God works, is it? Come on, how does He impart truth? He imparts truth by revelation. He speaks to your heart. There's a knowing. There's something that happens on the inside. And you can do the math up to a certain point. I'm not saying you can't get anywhere down that pathway. What I'm trying to suggest is when we're talking about a question this big, how did life come into being, and all the details of that our human reasoning, whether we're working from the scripture or whether we're working from science, is going to be insufficient. That's what I'm saying. You see, faith is not anti-reason, as some would suggest, but it comes by revelation of the truth to the heart, not by any amount of study. You are not a Christian because you subscribe to a set of beliefs. You become a Christian when God changes your heart. That's different between Christianity and just about everything else. Somebody could read the destiny doctrinal statement, our statement of faith, and go, agree, all the way down the line and still not be a Christian. You get that, right? This is not just a thing about intellect. It's not just talking about what's happening cognitively. It's talking about what's happening on the inside of a person. Have I accepted Jesus into my life? Am I living according to the way He wants me to live? Has He changed my heart? In the absence of that, the rest of it's irrelevant. I mean, you may live a little better if you have a Christian worldview, but you aren't a Christian. So, there'll be some benefit somewhere, but it's not going to determine your eternal destiny. So as believers, I think we can give sensible answers to people's honest questions. We can remove some of the obstacles, but that's as far as apologetics is ever going to get you. Our faith isn't proven by logic and argument. It's demonstrated by our own acts of faith. Let me say that again because it's important. Our faith is not proven by logic and argument. It's demonstrated by our own acts of faith. Listen to this. Hebrews chapter 11, 1-3. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it, the people of old received their commendation. By faith, we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. In other words, God made all of it. All the deeds of the heroes of our faith that are described throughout the rest of Hebrews chapter 11, the great chapter on faith. All of that rested on and were made possible by a belief that God created the universe. That inspired them to exercise faith in their own lives, in their own circumstances, and that should be our goal. People should look at our lives and they should question their unbelief. They should say, if God isn't real, how can she do that? Rather than pointing out the flaws in the evidence for evolution, I would suggest that we point to the evidence for the existence of God. In other words, don't start with what you disagree with someone about. Start with what everyone agrees on. Alistair and Joanna Collicutt McGrath argue this. It is not the gaps in our understanding of the world which point to God, but rather the very comprehensibility of scientific and other forms of understanding that requires explanation. In other words, why do we understand any of it? If everything is an accident and a fluke and by chance, how do we make sense of any of it? Not the bit that we can't make sense. How does any of it work? Why do we have gravity? Why is gravity consistent? Why does any of these things that make life possible, how come they're here? Roy Abraham Varghese asked this brilliant question in a great little book called There Is a God. Why is there something and not absolute nothingness? And why does the something that exists conform to symmetries or form complex structures? Again, to Jerry's point on the video, why doesn't it just go into decay? How have we gone from less complexity to greater complexity as opposed to in the opposite direction? Former atheist Anthony Flew writes in the same book, imagine entering a hotel room on your next vacation. The CD player on the bedside is softly playing a track from your favorite recording. The framed print over the bed is identical to the image that hangs over the fireplace at home. The room is scented with your favorite fragrance. Shake your head in amazement and drop your bags on the floor. You're suddenly very alert. You step over to the minibar, open the door and stare in wonder at the contents. Your favorite beverages. Your favorite cookies and candy. Even the brand of bottled water you prefer. You turn from the minibar and then gaze around the room. You notice a book on the desk. It's the latest volume by your favorite author. You glance into the bathroom where personal care and grooming products are lined up on the counter. Each one as if it was chosen specifically for you. You switch on the television, it's tuned to your favorite channel. Chances are with each new discovery about your hospitable new environment, you would be less inclined to think it was all mere coincidence, right? You might wonder how the hotel managers acquired such detailed information about you. You might marvel at their meticulous preparation. You might even double check what this is all going to cost you. But you would certainly be inclined to believe that someone knew you were coming. The vacation scenario is a clumsy, limited parallel to the so-called fine-tuning argument. The more I examine the universe and study the details of its architecture, writes physicist Freeman Dyson, the more evidence I find that the universe in some sense knew we were coming. In other words, the laws of nature seem to have been crafted so as to move the universe towards the emergence and sustenance of life. Let's take the most basic laws of physics. It's been calculated that Let's take the most basic laws of physics. It's been calculated that if the value of even one of the fundamental constants, the speed of light or the mass of an electron, for instance, had been to the slightest degree different, then no planet capable of permitting the evolution of human life could have formed. Let's change any variable and this doesn't work. So the whole argument is hinged on the idea that somehow there are such an infinite number of variables out there that it had to flukily work once. Not because anyone's ever found it to work once, but because if you can create a high enough number, you can make something sound plausible that's never been done before. And then I would point out that it's basically impossible to actually live life consistent with the atheistic view. You cannot actually live as if your life has no meaning, has no purpose. That neither you nor anyone or anything else has value. And that there is no such thing as morality. The only way to be consistent with that I can come up with, there'd be two options. One would be suicide, because it's all meaningless, this is a waste of time. Or the opposite would be an absolute self-centered barbarism, where I just take what I want, do what I want, and screw everyone. That's the only two things you could do that would be consistent with that life view in reality. But surely the best way, the Jesus way to lead someone to faith is to love one another and to do the things that he did, to heal the sick, to operate in the spiritual gifts. I mean, seriously, I do not have enough faith to be an atheist. But that's not the question. Do you know what the question is? Do I have enough faith to make an atheist question their unbelief? Does the way I live get someone else to go, I need to give God another thought? I need to ask myself, hold on. How does that work? I mean, there would be a whole lot less disputing of the supernatural if we demonstrated it. It gets really hard to argue that there's this closed loop of science if God keeps on invading it, right? I mean, that, if nothing else, really messes with your head. How you can know things that you couldn't know. How you can do things that you can't do. So that's where I want to leave it. Do you and I have enough faith and live on that basis consistently enough, radically enough, that the atheists in our lives question their unbelief? They stop and they go, hold on. Maybe I'm getting this wrong. Maybe I need to look at the math again. I hope so.